Good evening, everyone. Good to be here. It's a beautiful, warm evening. No coats needed. Glad you're here. We are going to be reading some tonight. So as you can see, we have the scriptures up on the screen there. So if you'd like to turn to that, we'll get to it shortly because we will be doing some reading. But first of all, drama presentation tonight. If your child is a second grader, which is a zebra, they probably think of themselves as zebras more than anything, then you need to attend the drama presentation immediately after class at 7:45. Zebras, second graders, 7:45. All right, let's get going on this. Let me introduce you to the characters tonight. Some of them are the same, most of them are not. All right. The first player in the drama this time is King Saul. We've had King Saul before, but he is going to play a major role in this. Now, if you remember, King Saul was first king of Israel, appointed by God, actually, anointed by Samuel. And Saul had a lot of problems. I call him bipolar, but I'm not sure that actually fits. He just had, he was up once, down once, up once, down once. It was amazing. But we're going to keep Saul in this lesson, this series this evening. All right. A new player is Jonathan. And if you know who Jonathan is, raise your hand real quick. Most everybody does. Some of you may not. Jonathan is Saul's son. And so in the grand scheme of things, you would think if Saul was going to be king of Israel, which he was, then at some point Jonathan would take over and be king. But of course, God had other plans. And Jonathan was not at all like his dad. Jonathan was a rather humble individual and certainly not a selfish person. So he must have had a good mom because he did not follow in the same path as King Saul. Another newcomer to the stage this evening is Ahimelech. Now, some of your versions have a CH on the end of that. That's fine either way you want it. My NIV has a K on the end. Ahimelech is a high priest, and we'll talk a little bit more about him, but he is a high priest at Nod, N-O-D. That's a town not far from present-day Jerusalem, but it wasn't called Jerusalem during this period of time, and in 1 Samuel here. It was not called Jerusalem. We'll talk maybe a little more about that here in just a second, because I want to show you something here. We've got a little map, and I put some arrows on it because things are kind of close together, but the red bubble is pointing to Nod, all right? And it's not far from a town called Jebus. Jebus is what now is Jerusalem. And so the name changed several times. It was once called Salem. You may remember King Melchizedek was the high priest at Salem. He was a priest of God, high priest of God, and he was at Salem, and he had nothing apparently to do with the family of Abraham. So God did not just work through Abraham's family. There were a lot of other things going on in the world, and God worked through them. But anyway, that later became Jerusalem when David decided to make it the capital. Saul's capital was Gibeah, and that's where he had his headquarters. There was no temple there. That's where he had his headquarters. There was a tabernacle there, but tabernacle moved around. And again, I think we'll talk about that maybe a little bit more in just a bit. In fact, let me go ahead and talk about that now. Originally, of course, the tabernacle was built at Mount Sinai under the directions of God given to Moses. And it was a tent. It was not a hard facility. It was made of a tent, had all the things in it that was needed for worship and for the presence of God and all that. It was moved around a lot through the years. Okay, over 40 years, it was east of Jordan, of the Jordan River. Before, of course, Israel walked across the Jordan to conquer the land of Egypt. And then for 7 years, it was planted on the plain just outside Jericho. Now, we remember Jericho because the Israelites were marched around Jericho 6 times, 7 times. They blew the horns and everything, and the city walls fell down. They went and took it over. Just outside of Jericho was a plain, and in that plain they settled. It was called Gilgal. Excuse me, I put an L on the end, and I said a D earlier. So they left it there while the Israelite soldiers conquered the rest of the promised land. Now, that's a little funny because you and I know they didn't conquer the rest of the promised land as they were supposed to. So there were several parts left that they didn't conquer, and there were several kings left that they did not conquer. And Jabez, or Salem, was not conquered. So that was remained right there. And later under King David, it was conquered. So after the 7 years on the plains near Jericho, it was moved to the center of, and I don't have a map of it, but the center of the promised land, or Canaan. It was moved closer out to the center at a place called Shiloh. And it was there for hundreds of years. There was a lot of dark history during that period of time. Bad things happened, a lot of dark history during that time. The ark was captured in that area because if you remember, Saul went to war with the Philistines, which was a common habit. Israel and Philistines were constantly going at it. And so if you remember, Saul decided, we'll win this war if I take the ark out there. He took the ark out there and lost it. So the temple, I keep saying temple, the tabernacle was without the ark of the covenant then. And then Samuel recreated that site, that battle site and all that stuff at Gilgal, and they got the ark back after that period of time. So then Samuel moved the tabernacle to Nod. So that's how we get to Nod. And Samuel appointed Ahimelech as the priest, and of course his sons are there, and other priests are there, part of the tribe of Levi are there. So Nod is considered a priestly town. There were a lot of priests there. You'll find that out a little bit later in our lesson. So it was a priestly town, and that's where the tabernacle was, and Ahimelech was the priest taking care of and dealing with the tabernacle. So anyway, that's kind of where we leave this, because we know that things changed later, but for now we're going to leave it at Nod, because this is the period of time that we're dealing with. All right. So let's go on and continue introducing cast members. We have King David, we have Jonathan, we have his son, we have Ahimelech, the high priest, and now, of course, we have Doeg. Now, Doeg is the subject this evening. He's the bad guy. Doeg is the chief shepherd for King Saul. So if you think in terms of our style of government, he would be a member of the cabinet of Saul. Saul had all these people, people in charge of the army, people in charge of this, people in charge of that, and he had somebody in charge of his flocks. And so that would be Doeg. So Doeg obviously had a shepherd's background, so he could do that, but yet he was risen to that point of being in charge of everything. So he and Saul were close, and I'm sure he reported to Saul quite often. So Doeg is one of those guys that is going to be the subject of our lesson tonight. He was an Edomite. How many of you, raise your hand if you know what an Edomite is? Not very many. Okay, Tim? Okay. Do you remember Jacob and Esau? Okay. And remember, they were twins, but yet Esau was born slightly before Jacob was, and Jacob came out hanging on to Esau's leg and everything. And then the next thing we remember about that is that Esau, being the oldest, would get he would have the oldest, he would have the birthright handed to him from his father. And yet he was tricked. Esau came in one time and he was hungry, he was tired, he had been out hunting or something, and he saw Jacob with some stew. He was making some stew. So, of course, Esau came in and said, man, I really want some of that. And Jacob fooled him by saying, well, hey, I'll give you some if you'll sign your birthright over to me. So he did. So now, instead of Esau being the guy who would have the birthright, now Jacob has the birthright. And so that's where we get that's where we get the Edomites. Esau name was also Edom. Got that? His name was also Edom. And so the Edomite clan or nation, whether it was a nation or just a group of people, that was on that side of the family. And it was through Jacob then that the line kept coming for the Messiah. So Esau missed out. And so Israel and Edom, or the Edomites, were constantly at each other, even though the Edomites were by proselytation, they were proselyted. Some of y'all are looking at me weird. I have no idea why. They were proselytes to Judaism, all right? But they had no real standing as being the family that God established. And so there was always a schism there between the two. Do you remember a king in Israel that was an Edomite? Just raise your hand if you remember that. King Herod the Great. He was an Edomite. And so he was looked down on by the Israelites because he wasn't really an Israelite. He was really a sellout to the Roman Empire. So there were a lot of issues between the Edomites and the Israelites. Doeg worked for Saul. He was Saul's chief shepherd, but he was an Edomite. Okay. So what does that tell us? Well, we really don't know. He might be loyal. He might not be loyal. Okay. So we'll find out as we move forward just a little bit. All right. Another person coming into play here is David. And of course, David at this point is likely still fairly young. He is a servant of Saul. He has already been anointed by Samuel as the king. He's already been anointed as the king, but he hasn't taken that role yet. And yet he and Saul have this back and forth relationship. David wants a relationship with Saul. He wants to serve Saul. He knows that Saul is the anointed king, anointed by God to be where he is. And yet, Saul kind of keeps going back and forth with this relationship and doesn't like David part of the time and kind of likes David part of the time. So Jonathan, Saul's son, is the best friend of David. So those two guys get along quite well. All right, here we go. In this relationship that Saul and David had, Saul wants to kill David. On several occasions, he wants to kill David. Let's go into 1 Samuel. I've got chapter 19 written down there. Excuse me. But I want to read the last few verses of chapter 18. The very last verse of chapter 18 says, the Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as oft as they did, David met with more success than the rest of Saul's officials, and his name became well known. Now that probably strikes a chord by remembering that when they came back from battle, as was the custom, here comes the warriors, let's all get out in the street and have a parade and yay rah us and throw graffiti around and stuff. And the ladies chanted, Saul has killed his thousands, isn't that great? But David has killed his 10,000s. And that made Saul just that much madder. He couldn't stand the fact that David was getting more attention than he was. So if you look at the first verse of chapter 19, 1 Samuel, Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. So he's had it with David. He doesn't want any part of David. He wants to get rid of him. And so he has called his attendants. That could be his cabinets, could be the people around him, and certainly his son. I want him killed. Now we jump down to verse 6 of chapter 19, and we read, Saul listened to Jonathan. Jonathan had visited with him, and took this oath. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. This is the back and forth of Saul. Whatever his mental problem was, whether it was just jealousy, fits of rage, whatever it was, whether it was a lot of scholars believe he was mentally ill, and they just believe that because of the way he acted. But whatever it was, he would go back and forth on this David thing. I want them all killed, verse 1. I want David killed. Now you guys go kill him. And then by verse 6, Jonathan has talked him down from that position, and he said, as sure as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. Now jump down to verse 9. But an evil spirit, here we go again, from the Lord came on Saul, and as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, while David was playing the lyre, and Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear. But David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good his escape. So Saul's listening to David. If you remember, back in the beginning of their relationship, Saul would get down and he would be sulking or he would be depressed or whatever, and he'd call David in with his harp and he would play music and Saul would be soothed. Okay, well, so here we have David continuing that practice, and Saul all of a sudden decides to spear him. Here's the interesting thing. Verse 9 says, but an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul. So God is playing a part in this, okay? We have two kings at this point. Two kings. One is sitting on the throne, one is waiting to sit on the throne. Very unusual situation, unless the one waiting is a son of the king, and then that's a natural way. But it's not a son of the king. It's somebody else. And so Saul is having all kinds of problems with this. All right, jump into chapter 20. Let's go to chapter 20. David gets some help from Jonathan. David then fled to Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, what have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to kill me? So David has a good relationship with Jonathan, trying to figure out what's going on. David went to where Jonathan was, and he's having this visit with him. Now, verse 2, never, Jonathan replied, you are not going to die. Now, where did he get that idea? Remember his last conversation with his dad? His last conversation with his dad, Saul, says, as sure as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. Okay, so Saul's trying to bring him down, calm him down. Verse 4, Jonathan said to David, whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you. He knows his friend David is really struggling. I mean, who wouldn't be if somebody had just tried to kill you and knows he's really struggling? Jonathan wants to do anything that he can possibly do to help out. All right, let's jump over to chapter 21. This is where I'm going to start reading. We'll jump around here a little bit. 21, beginning in verse 1. David went to Nob. We already talked about Nob. Nob is where the tabernacle is, and Ahimelech is the priest. David went to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked, why are you alone? Why is no one with you? Ahimelech, is he suspecting something's wrong? Maybe. David always had someone with him. Is Ahimelech a good guy? Ahimelech is a good guy, okay? Keep going. So David answered Ahimelech, and he started lying to him. He didn't tell him the truth. He said to the priest, the king sent me on a mission and said to me, no one is to know anything about the mission I'm sending you on. As for my men, I've told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can find. So David is coming to the priest needing some food. The priest is suspicious, Ahimelech's suspicious to what's going on, but yet, hey, this is David. This is anointed of God, so he's going to go with the program. Verse 4, but the priest answered David, I don't have any ordinary bread on hand, only there is some consecrated bread. Remember, Ahimelech is in charge of the tabernacle, and they use the consecrated bread in the worship. So I only have consecrated bread, provided the men have kept themselves from women. So, you can't take the consecrated bread if you've had a relationship with a woman. Verse 5, David's continuing to lie here, okay? David replied, indeed, women have been kept from us as usual wherever I set out. The men's bodies are holy, even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today? So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no other bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced with hot bread on the day that it was taken. Verse 7, now one of Saul's servants was there. He was detained before the Lord. So God has had a hand in this several times, okay? And here he has a hand in it again. He was detained before the Lord. He was Doeg, okay? Doeg's our bad guy in this, all right? Doeg the Edomite, Saul's chief priest. Verse 8, David asked Ahimelech, don't you have a spear or sword here? David fled so fast, he doesn't have anything with him. He didn't take any food. He probably only has the clothes on his back. He has nothing with him. He has none of his weapons, anything with him, okay? So David asked Ahimelech, don't you have a spear or a sword here? I haven't brought my sword or any other weapon because the king's mission was urgent. Another lie. 9, the priest replies, I love this part. The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here, and it's wrapped in a cloth behind the ephah. If you want it, take it. There's no sword here but that one. So David said, there is none like it, give it to me. We go clear around the circle. This is the sword David cut off the head of Goliath with, and then all of a sudden, somebody grabbed it either for a souvenir of the battle, or just somebody took it to the temple. So, the tabernacle. Somebody took it to the priest and said, here, keep this. So he had it wrapped up. He had no use for it. Levites weren't fighting people. They didn't have weapons. They had no charge to go out into war of any kind. So isn't it interesting that David winds up with Goliath's sword? All right, let's jump over to chapter 22. Saul is going to shame his men. Saul is a manipulator. And one of the ways someone in power, one of the ways they can manipulate those under him is by shaming them. You haven't done anything. You're not very good. I remember when I was a kid playing football in junior high and high school, it was like every time I do something good, the coach would get on to me. Well, you can do better than that. Here I'm thinking I did something good. So those of you that have been in sports understand that a lot of coaches, they don't mean to put you down, but by using that tactic, they hope to make you better. In this case, Saul hopes to find David by shaming his people. Here we go. Now Saul heard that, chapter 22, verse 6. Now Saul heard that David and his men had been discovered. And Saul was seated, spear in hand, probably the same one he tried to kill David with, under the tamarisk tree on the hill at Gibeah. That's his headquarters. That's where Saul lived, with all of his officials standing around him. And he said to them, verse 7, "Listen, men of Benjamin." Saul was a Benjamite. Therefore he, I'm sure, surrounded himself with a lot of Benjamites. "Will the son of Jesse give all of you fields of vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why you have conspired against me?" They haven't conspired against him. He's shaming them. "No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie in wait for me as he does today." Wow. So he's gathered his people around and he's chewing them out. And that part about that, if you picked up on that part about where he says, will David, fitting that in, will David give you fields and vineyards and stuff like I do? I do things for it. Will David do that? David doesn't have anything. He has zero in this world. He's a servant of Saul just like these other guys are. So he's using that. Hey, don't we see that in presidential campaigns, don't we? I'll give you, I'll do this for you. And that's exactly the same thing that Saul is trying to do here. No problem whatsoever. But Doeg, he comes back on the scene. Doeg the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's official. Why? Because he was one of Saul's officials. He was standing with Saul's officials, said, "I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him, and he also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath the Philistine." Wow, this is getting good. So Doeg squeals on David. He's a tattletale. And so Saul's happy about that. But Doeg has no relationship with David. He probably has no relationship with God. And so anything Saul wants that David can lift himself up, make himself better, he's going to do it. So he squeals on David. All right, 11 through 16. Saul is going to send, not for David. He's not real sure where David is, but he knows where Ahimelech is. Verse 11. Then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech and sons of Ahitub and all the men of his family who were priests. That makes sense. They're all Levites at Nob. And they all came to the king. They're loyal. King wants to see us. We're happy to go see the king. Apparently, Ahimelech did not suspect that David was on the run. Okay. So, verse 12, Saul said, "Listen now, son of Ahitub." "Yes, my lord," he answered. Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me?" Can you imagine Ahimelech going, "What? I've conspired against you?" You and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today. Ahimelech has to be, what in the world is going on here? Verse 14, Ahimelech answers the king, who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law? Why was he son-in-law? Who had he married? One of Saul's daughters. Okay, so they're related by marriage. Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and highly respected in your household? Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? In other words, I've done this before. Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servants of any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair. But the king said, you will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family. Saul is treacherous. He didn't call Ahimelech to find out something from him. He didn't call him because he thought Ahimelech had some knowledge that he needed. He called Ahimelech because Ahimelech supported David in that time. When David went and said, hey, I'm on a mission of Saul, and I need bread, and do you have any swords or spears around? Yeah, sure, let me help you out. And then, of course, he prayed to God for David. And now he's being called on the carpet for it. And Saul condemns him to death. Wow. How crazy can you get? All right, look at verse 17. Then the king ordered the guards at his side, he's got them there, turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. They know he was fleeing, yet they did not tell me. Is there an indication that Ahimelech believes David's fleeing? There is no indication of that. But Saul is this maniac guy, and he does things that are not normal people would do. But the king's officials were unwilling to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. So Saul has no regard at this point for David, has no regard for Ahimelech, and the guards, the people that are with him, have a regard. This is a priest of God. I'm not going to raise my hand to him. I'm not going to kill these people. So verse 18 says, Then the king ordered Doeg. Why did he call on Doeg? Well, Doeg was there. Doeg brought the message. But why did he call on Doeg to do this next deed? I think it's because Doeg is a scoundrel. I think it's because Doeg is an opportunist. I think it's because Doeg's an Edomite. I think it's because Doeg is loyal to Saul. The king ordered Doeg, you turn and strike down the priests. So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck them down. That day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. That was what the priests wore, that white linen ephod. He also put, I don't know that this was asked, but he also put to the sword Nod. Remember what I told you about Nod? Nod was a priestly city. It was where the tabernacle was. This is where tons of priests were. So he also put to the sword Nod, the town of the priests, with its men and women, its children and its infants and its cattle and its donkeys and its sheep. Nod was wiped out. Doeg wiped the city off the face of the map concerning people. So what's wrong with Doeg? We don't know, but we know how crazy Saul is. Why is Doeg doing this? Doeg, as I mentioned earlier, is probably an opportunist. If I can gain favor with Saul by killing those priests in front of him, boy, he's really going to be proud of me when I finish off the whole city. Doeg is a bad dude, without any doubt. What's a good lesson we can learn from Doeg? Was Doeg, as I mentioned, an opportunist, or was he simply loyal to King Saul? Well, personally, I think he was an opportunist, because I think the kind of people that Doeg is would have been loyal to whomever he decided he wanted to be loyal to. So Doeg did the deeds. No, I went backwards. So Doeg did the deeds, and he killed the priest, and he wiped out everybody in the city of Nod. David composed a song, and I just heard the first bell ring. We're going to go ahead and do this. I want you to turn over to Psalms chapter 52. This is one of David's psalms or songs. Some of David's psalms have an introduction to them. And that's what you see in Psalms 52, you see it in Psalms 51, you see it in a lot of the Psalms. It says, for the director of music, a maskil, which is probably a musical term of some kind, a maskil of David. When Doeg the Edomite had gone to Saul and told him David was gone to the house of Ahimelech. That's all it took. Saul took it from there. Going to kill him. Going to kill priests, going to go after David, going to kill him. So here we go. Why do you boast of evil, you mighty hero? Why do you boast all day long? You who are a disgrace in the eyes of God. You who practice deceit, your tongue plots destruction. It's like a sharpened razor. You love evil rather than good, falsehood rather than speaking the truth. You love every harmful word, you deceitful tongue. Surely God will bring you down to everlasting ruin. He will snatch you up and pluck you from your tent, and he will uproot you from the land of the living. The righteous will see the fear, and they will laugh at you, saying, here now is a man who did not make God his stronghold, but trusted in his great wealth and grew strong to destroy others. But I am like an olive tree flourishing in the house of God. I trust in God's unfailing love forever and ever. For what you have done, I will always praise you in the presence of your faithful people. And I will hope in your name, for your name is good. Speaking to God. So, after all that time, Doeg gets his own psalm, and it's not good. All right. Probably 5 minutes before you need to go down to the drama, if that's the case. Take time to fellowship with each other. Next week we have Herod Antipas. Good old Herod Antipas. Mark 6, 14 through 28. Matthew 14, 1 through 12.
Good evening, church. It's time to have our evening devotional to finish out this evening. If you're out in the foyer, come on inside and find you a seat. Listen to a great lesson this evening. So before we get started with that, everybody take your songbooks. Turn to number 997. 997. Oh, come all ye faithful. (997). O come, all ye faithful, joyful and triumphant. O come ye to Bethlehem. Come and behold him, born the King of angels. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord. Sing, choirs of angels, sing in exaltation. Oh, sing, all ye scribes of heaven above. Glory to God, glory in the highest. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord. Yea, though we greet thee, born this happy morning, Jesus, to thee be all glory given. Word of the Father, now in flesh appearing. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord.
Good evening. When I was a smaller kid, around about 2 or 3 years old, I would quite knowingly get right up on top of the table and look dead straight at my mom, knowing full well I was not supposed to be up on that table. And I would look at her with this "what you gonna do about it" kind of face. And I would do this very exclusively when she was tending to my sister Adeline. So she had no way of coming over and saying, "Cooper, get off the table." And I would always stand there right until the very last second. When Mom was finally done caring for my sister, I would leap triumphantly off the table and land on the ground, unpunished. Then, in that age and in those actions, I did not have what people might call self-awareness or discipline. I grew out of it, mostly. Nonetheless, I'm now capable of taking my own desires and my own wants into consideration when I decide to act. What initially brought this to mind was Proverbs 9, 6 through 9, and that is following. Leave your simple ways and live. Walk in the way of insight. Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. Growing up helped me to turn away from the simple pleasure of antagonizing my mom. When we're able, and I was able to start taking my own desires into consideration, and as soon as we have reached this ability to be able to be self-aware and knowledgeable of what we want, we can start discerning the differences between what God wants and what our flesh wants. And as soon as we have reached that capability, I encourage with all haste to set up safeguards between you and the sins that chronically capture you. Immediately after we're able to achieve this level of knowledge, the logic in the following verses follow suit, and we can start becoming wiser individuals. Now, a piece of this, especially when it comes to who you're going to spend your time evangelizing to, comes with discerning the scoffers from the pearls. Most scoffers simply want to get a rise out of you, and as far as it goes in this particular example, most wicked people just want to see you stumble. Don't get enraged out of a scoffer. If you get enraged at somebody that's scoffing you, you've already lost. They have won. They've taken control of you, essentially. All the anger we can muster at those sorts of people will never be righteous anger. As far as it goes, the only example that I have ever seen of righteous anger in that context would be from the Son of God. Now, it's much more important that we focus on building one another up and focusing our energy into those people that are curious about the love of Christ that we should be bringing into the world. With that being said, I have come a long ways for being 2 and 3 years old, and this is with great gratitude I shall present my mother in this instance. Discipline is a great thing to have, I shall tell you. Now, while she definitely wasn't happy with me in this instance, I hope that she's happy with me in this present. So, the centerpiece of my message for you tonight is to get wisdom, know yourself, know your flesh, know God, and that's all I have for the remainder of this evening. Cameron will now lead us in a closing prayer.
Will y'all bow with me? Our heavenly and glorious and amazing mighty Father, we thank you so much for everything you have done for us for this amazing day you have blessed with us. We thank you for the lesson that Cooper has given us of being wise, knowing our flesh, knowing ourselves, and knowing God. Let us keep on going throughout this week and keep showing the world us to you, Lord. Thank you so much. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.